I'm having a wonderful chat with Neil Ferris in London. He is the conductor of the British choral ensemble Sonora, and we are going to be speaking about the 2018, I believe, release on Resonance CD from 2018, Passion and Polyphony. Geez, you must have sat around and spent some hours thinking that one up. Passion and Polyphony, sacred choral music by, and here's what's so interesting, this is why my radar picked up, sacred choral music by Frank Martin, Belgian composer, and Sir James Macmillan, Scottish composer. And we spoke a little bit earlier, we're going to get into the details a little bit later, but this is such an interesting in terms of the history of the United Kingdom, if you will, I mean, among other things, but this idea of Sir James Macmillan is Scottish, Roman Catholic.
Yes,
And Frank
very much so.
Oh, very much so. Oh,
Very much so.
so he,
Uh, it
lo-
it drives his it drives his creative flow, his
he
firm faith.
interesting. So he therefore longs for the separation, I presume. And
Yeah,
then
we went. He's also a very staunch supporter of Glasgow Celtic, the soccer team. Um, so yeah, his views are on Scottish independence are a little more mild.
Oh, okay, this is good. So he doesn't get in trouble with the
No, he
authorities in
quite
England.
often gets himself into trouble in Scotland, but he's a he's really interesting writer, a writer and thinker on the arts and faith and nationalism as well, and what it is to feel Scottish. So,
Wonderful.
to follow up on that, then there are many things online that many of his discussions.
Wonderful. So he's extremely involved, obviously intellectually, as well as just musically, but in the politics, the history, and so on of Scotland, and let alone the Roman Catholic Church. And then help, we've got Frank Martin, Belgian, son.
Swiss,
Oh,
Swiss,
Swiss. How did I
Swiss.
get that? Anywho,
Swiss
sorry.
Calvinist, but he spent a lot of his time in, I think maybe Holland rather than Belgium, but yeah, definitely he has association with the Low Countries, but he was a Swiss Calvinist.
Yes, and that's so interesting. I haven't heard since I last read a history book from about the 1800s, a person very proudly being identified as a Huguenot family.
Yes,
You know, all of the persecution and all the rest of it goes with that name,
yes.
Huguenot. So
Well,
Huguenot Calvinist, born near Geneva, I see now. Sorry, I hadn't gotten down that
uh,
far in my notes. But his father was also a Calvinist pastor. So we're talking about very strong beliefs being
yeah,
expressed here on this CD. Okay,
yes.
now, let's go. Tell me the story. It sounds a bit corny, but now it's your turn. You have to tell me the story of your life in music, the beginnings. I mean, how come choir music attracted you? All that, the journey. Where are you now?
Right. Well, it's the love of singing and choral music came to me rather later. It was only whilst I was at university that I really got the bug for choral music. I played the violin. That was my first instrument,
Interesting.
um, and violin and piano. I wasn't so into singing. I sang a bit in my church choir, and I sang a bit at school because I felt responsible. I had a music scholarship, a music award at school, so I felt obliged to sing when I was asked to sing. But violin was my love, and I played in a wonderful youth orchestra in Southampton, the port city on the south coast, and that was my love. And I went to university. I went to study music at Royal Holloway University of London, which has that college of the University of London is near Windsor,
And one of the
and
most
it,
extraordinary buildings on earth, as I
oh
remember, Royal Holloway. That structure alone is incredible. Go
and
ahead.
I went up with a friend of mine from youth orchestra, and she was into singing as well. And she said, "Oh, I've joined the chapel choir. Why don't you come along?" And I said, "Oh, all right." You know, I was looking to occupy my time, and I got the bug and love for choral music, singing every day. we had a morning service for 15 minutes every weekday before lectures started at 9 o'clock, and we had two evensongs a week as well. And just that rich choral heritage, it was opened up before my eyes in a gorgeous chapel with a fantastic Father Willis organ. So, uh,
And by the way, now knowing,
started there.
and by the way, now, you know, in these days of your professional career as a conductor as well, no one can give you any trouble playing in the orchestra. You are a violinist, pianist, yeah. So you know,
Yes.
so you have it. You've
And
won.
they'll always find ways of giving me trouble, which is fair enough.
That's musicians for you. Uh, I want to just identify the dates. Sir James Macmillan, the Scottish composer that we're going to discuss here in a moment, born in 1959, so he's very much with us, still
Yeah.
dynamic. I love his music, his wonderful harmonies. I mean, we'll discuss it. And then Frank Martin, 1890 to 1974. And both of these two composers, wonderful repertoire that you have selected. And by the way, aside from choosing these two religious uh, poles for this CD, how did you? I always ask this question because it's so curious of all this huge repertoire. How did you settle upon these particular pieces? And let me just go through them quickly. I mean, James Macmillan, we have Cecilia Vergo, a second piece, Children Are a Heritage of the Lord, absolutely exquisite. Miserere, and then at the end of the CD, four more pieces: Hymn to the Blessed Sacrament, Bring Us, O Lord God, Data est nihi omnius potestas. Sorry about my Latin, that's horrible.
That sounds fine to me.
And O Radiant Dawn, gorgeous. And then Frank Martin, the Mass for double choir, just an enormous, huge work. What, of all the repertoire of these two composers, why did you pay
I
this?
loved the Frank Martin Mass for a while. Um, in the late 1990s, Hyperion released an extraordinary recording of it by Westminster Cathedral Choir. Um, and to those of us studying university at the time and into choral music, when that recording came out, um, we've just listened to it on loop, I think, really.
Mm.
So I've loved it for a long time um, because it's extraordinarily passionate.
Sorry, that's traffic going by. Would you mind repeating?
Uh,
I'm in downtown Little Santa Barbara, and the traffic noise is horrendous. You were saying, please, if you don't mind
he
repeating.
he, um, he wrote it in 1922, and uh, he kept it locked away in a desk drawer um, because he felt it was his personal devotion to God. And it was only in the 1960s that a friend of his discovered it and looked at it and said, "Please, please, 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 may I perform this piece with my choir?" And so we've only known it since the 1960s.
Isn't it amazing the stuff that's stuck away in drawers and then is discovered? And that's not only is that the glory of our current age, but the modern age of computers and everything. When I was a kid, I never would have gotten anywhere close to being able to hear this kind of repertoire. You know what I mean? It's just so accessible on the internet. Uh,
Yeah.
but also as I remember reading a little bit, the Kyrie he managed in 1926. So this work kind of have I got that correct? That the Kyrie is later than the rest of the Mass, or do you recall?
I
Just
can't recall off the top of my head.
okay, good. So I win that one.
So
Will
you're absolutely hands down on that one.
okay, I believe this is accurate that he came back to compose the Kyrie in 1926. Not that it matters, but the idea of working on a piece and then putting it away in the drawer and then going, no, and coming back and having it.
What's extraordinary about that Kyrie is straight away you're in by the opening you're in an old world. You're in the world of polyphony,
Yeah.
and it is through polyphony, and you can hear in the James Macmillan in the Miserere the Gregorian chant. So it's in that that the two composers are related.
That's very, very
That,
interesting. And of course, I did notice that because it's also mentioned in the program books and booklet, and I find that so interesting that these are very, very much contemporary works, all of them, wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous, wonderful harmonies, all that good stuff. And the structure, more often than not, the structure is straight out of the Renaissance or straight out of contrapuntal writing in the Baroque period. So it's so interesting to use these old devices in contemporary music. I find that amazing. Tell me about. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that little?
no, no.
No?
I think that's beautifully summed up.
Tell me about Sonoro, because and your history with them. You'll describe this co-artistic directorship that you have, but also what is more important is how does it how do you bring this kind of sing? These are professional singers, 20 of them. They sound like 180 when necessary. How did that process of bringing and of course in the choral tradition in the UK, choirs are everywhere. So these singers are obviously in huge demand, I would imagine. How'd you corral this particular group together so perfectly blended, such gorgeous quality of sound and so on? Tell me the story of Sonoro.
Well, we're very lucky in the UK. We have an incredibly rich choral heritage. That choral heritage largely is derived by the church and cathedral tradition that we have, and the choir schools, and then also the fantastic university college choirs, particularly at Oxford and Cambridge. And it'll be those that in the US you're really familiar with. We also have some fantastic professional choirs that will have reached you, such as the 16 and Tenebrae, possibly. Um, so it wouldn't have been any point in setting up another professional choir that sounded the same as those. They're largely from that tradition. I wanted to set up a choir with my colleague Michael Higgins that just had a different slant on the sound, how the sound was produced, and I wanted to use singers that had access with their technique to fuller and richer sound. And therefore, most of my singers have been through the conservatoire tradition rather than just university. So they've had extra training, and so they may have even trained through postgrad at conservatoire and maybe even opera school as well. So they have really honed their technique and therefore are able to access the full range of colour in their voices. And then putting 18 to 20 outstandingly trained musicians in a choir and working on the blend and colour, variety of weight, and also choosing the right. I don't have 20 voices of the same weight. It's adapting the weights of the voices and getting the right blend to start with the people you choose. But then also when you're working together, it's a real treat to be able to finally hone an ensemble when they can produce such warmth and colour.
Yeah, and it's not only just warmth and color, it's a huge, bright sound. That's what I have as a take.
Yeah,
just a bright sound.
that's. I'm really happy that you say that because the brightness in this country. I think in the UK we might not be the word that comes to mind because the brightness here in the UK is associated with cathedral choirs and boys' voices and countertenors as well, male altos. So.
And that is not what I was referring to. You know what I mean? My idea
Yeah,
of that
yeah.
this bright
So
sound.
that's really interesting that you describe it as bright. But I think also in our dynamic range we have because they can really spin the sound. Their technique is so good that in the softer dynamic range you can still get the bloom on the sound, and that's therefore gives you access to more of the harmonic series that gives you the bloom and the luster on the sound that we produce.
Yeah, I mean, it's really extraordinary, and I've been listening recently to many British choirs, several anywho, choirs, and this sound of sonoro really stuck out to me. It was forgive me. It was almost North American. It was, you know what I
Well,
mean?
yeah,
It's like it's an
it can
American.
quite easily forgiven because through either tours of American choirs to the UK, or I've been over to Boston, so I've heard a good number of choirs from the eastern seaboard. Um, and yeah, your university choirs are trained to a fantastic standard, and yes, have that rich variety in colour, and it's not. Um, it's a very fair comparison to make. And I love the American choral tradition. I love that singers are allowed to really sing and sing well and sing properly.
Well, so far I haven't gotten in trouble with you. I'm happy to say. Let's you know, I heard we spoke before the taping, but I love non-vibrato a cappella choral sound. It's so clean, so clear. And by the way, the diction of your singers, of course, I mean, these are almost unnecessary compliments in that at the level of this kind of singing, the diction is so clean and pure. The sound, the balance, let alone the tremendous blend. I think I mentioned to you, nothing ever goes over the top. You have these most incredible sopranos. And by the way, this music is very difficult. There's nothing easy about this repertoire. But so they achieve. I'm going to ask you about one particular moment. I'm trying to figure out just exactly how high those sopranos were singing. You might know what I'm referring to, but I guess what I'm getting at is this capacity of this choir, this tone color that is just somehow a little bit different than what I ordinarily hear with British choirs, and then how. I mean, how many? Did they come into the first rehearsal and have it? I mean, did you take a couple of years to discover, to change personnel a little bit, how that process worked? I don't want to belabor it, but just give me an idea of where you are now and where you were at the beginning. 2006, I think. Yes, was that the beginning of the choir?
2016. So we're still young. We're still toddlers.
Doesn't sound it.
We um, we put feelers out on who might be the right kind of people to ask to start with, and we haven't changed so much over the 3 years, but gradually and just by recommendation or hearing people or auditioning or trying people out, we have an idea on who our first call, but because we can't employ people full time, because we don't have the funds, resources to do that, then we are, as you said, a lot of our singers sing with other professional choirs as well, so we have to book them early enough if we want to get the people who are our first choice. But yes, we put feelers out on who would have the right kind of voice to start with. So we largely started with this sound.
Okay, and they are, as you have just described, widely experienced. They would be at this level of singing and in demand to sing in many choirs in Britain, I'm sure. I guess my question is, let's talk a little bit about vibrato and non-vibrato. I think I mentioned it a bit earlier, but I don't believe you actually. Did anybody give you any trouble? Do singers give you any difficulty about controlling vibrato or whatever it is? I mean, I love the non-vibrato sound, as I mentioned, but what is that, and what are the
Well,
compromises?
what is vibrato? I mean,
Here.
vibrato is a naturally occurring oscillation as a result of singing, so it's very difficult to actually deliberately stop it. Now, if you vibrato, a lot of people um, say vibrato is actually what happens is the wobble, and the wobble can be a sign of bad vocal technique. So it's not necessarily to do with singers being told to sing with vibrato or without vibrato. If you say to your singers, please can you sing this without vibrato, you're actually asking them straight away to compress their voice and therefore damaging their voice.
Interesting.
If you say without vibrato, but if you are using voices that are naturally lighter, where the vibrato isn't quite so heavy, then that's fine. But to say sing with vibrato or sing without vibrato is actually not really exploring their technique to the fullest.
I've heard this before as a conductor about timpanists. You never ask a timpanist to use harder sticks. It's like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. Well, that's very interesting. I've never heard this before. Go ahead.
With the singers that I work with, we don't talk about vibrato. I just let them sing. I just let them sing, and then I balance it and tune it. And for particular colours, on occasion, I could ask them to sing with less weight, take the weight out of it. But then it's up to them to find from their own superb technique to find the right way of doing that. But if I say to them all sing without vibrato, it's actually not going to make a very nice sound.
That is so fascinating to me. I've never heard this described in that way before, and I guess my timpanist analogy is along the same ways. It essentially is a word you don't use.
Hopefully on the disc, you found that it was colourful, but it didn't have too much wobble.
I hate the word wobble. It's so English, but on the other hand, it's so appropriate. I did not hear any wobble. I heard some very, very discreet vibrato from time to time. That's kind of why I asked the question, whether there were moments when you, and now I know better. Thank you for my future. I'm 71. Will I have a career as a choir director? No. But knowing this idea that to ask people to sing without vibrato essentially clamps them down. It's just the wrong choice of idea.
Yeah, I suppose what's the analogy? Maybe asking a violinist to only use 2/3 of their bow.
And also, you know very well this problem. You mentioned it just earlier about vibrato as a violinist. It's very hard to tell fiddle players to play without vibrato. They're just naturally inclined.
You can exploit it as a color.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and actually it shuts off such a rich part of a singer's color. And I think we in the UK we perhaps not fully understood what vibrato is, and there's been this idea that to tune things more easily you sing things straighter, but actually I'm more inclined the other way, is that if people are singing well, if the vowel placements are right because they're not having to modify or twist their voices around, then you're going to get a better blended sound, and it's in the blend that you hear the better tuning.
Thank you very, very much indeed. That was an amazing explication. I've never heard it before. I must take notes and remember this encounter. But very interesting, very, very interesting, because and again, to me, the sound I heard was, of course, this a cappella sound is already a miracle I'm going to ask you about, but it seemed very straight. I believe you might have used that word, with the occasional warmth. In other words, color, color, color. But I wondered. That's why I asked whether there was a deliberate attempt.
Yeah.
What I think you're saying is they sing beautifully and gorgeously, and things take care of themselves, and you can, and that the important thing is getting the balance and the blend.
Yes.
Together.
And to allow them their breath to flow freely is the other really crucial point to make.
Amazing, and you, it's a good.
Breath is free, so that it makes everything else.
Yep. Sorry, there went by another truck.
It's all right. Planes over here. I'm a couple of miles south of Heathrow, and they're just beginning to sort of turn right round over the house.
Amazing. And I have a question for you at the end of our conversation about something I've never seen before in Britain. How long did it take? Well, we asked about how long it took to get this superb sound together, but now I want to talk about where am I here? Hold it a second. Oh, about keeping this is an all a cappella sound on this recording,
Yeah.
a cappella singing. We're talking about the double mass, for example, that lasts something, 24, 26 minutes, something in that range. How do you keep the pitch there? I know that this is a recording, so you might have had opportunities, but in live performance, what are the secrets? It's a dumb question coming from me as an instrumentalist, but I want to know, how do you keep that pitch going?
Um, well, it's largely related to actually what we were just talking about. Um, it's in um, it's how in command of their technique the singers are. Then it's about allowing the breath to flow freely. Then it's about confidence enough, the combination of the linear aspect, the melodic line, and knowing how everything relates vertically as well. So the linear is easier when you are singing freely, and then you're more likely to sing with greater flow and ease, and therefore the tuning is going to be better because of that. Then it's also important to understand at a crucial vertical moment that you are orally aware of where you need to lock in as well. So it's a combination of the two, your oral perception and the mastery of your technique.
So once again, you have described a superb choir. Congratulations. It's absolutely magnificent performance, and I'm now satisfied.
Anyone, fatigue can set in.
Uh,
So you're relying on them being fresh enough, and that you haven't recorded for too many hours in a row, or you haven't done a massive long rehearsal before a performance.
so keeping them fit,
Yeah.
yeah, without exhausting them is also crucial. Let's just have a little look, I think, at this point at some of this incredible music on this CD. Let's start with Sir James Macmillan, which opens the three wonderful pieces. This is the James Macmillan, born in 1959, so we're talking about a contemporary Scottish composer. Scored for double choir, this Cecilia Virgo.
Yes.
And here is just I'm gonna throw some of my notes from listening, and then you're going to help me, okay?
Yeah.
And we've discussed it, a lot of this already, but clean, clear, bright sound, subtle dissonances. This is his compositional style, I think, also.
Yes. Yes.
Beautifully subtle dissonances,
Yeah.
beautiful, quiet cadential movement that is so moving. The balances are fabulous. The pitch is tricky, I think, in a lot of these pieces, and yet, of course, they sing superbly. Sectional blend is nigh perfect. I've written down all that stuff. What else about James Macmillan in particular as a composer in terms of his accessibility to professional singers? You know what I mean? Difficult or not difficult, and what I've just seen, and the result.
He's extraordinarily versatile, and he is also his writing is with consistent integrity.
Mm.
Um, so he doesn't resort to easy tropes. But he is extraordinarily versatile, so he is able to write a simple motet for a church choir, and he's able to write an extraordinary large-scale work.
So in other words, he's very aware of. So
His setting of the John Passion for symphony orchestra and chorus and semi-chorus is quite a wonderful masterpiece.
I saw the CD being mentioned or something. I saw it somewhere, so I know of what you speak. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is everything on this disc is virtuoso, I think, in terms of the execution.
Yes, and I suppose the two more straightforward pieces are O Radiant Dawn, the Advent antiphon, and into the Blessed Sacrament, which he wrote when he was much younger.
Can you describe this idea of I read in the booklet, beautiful, wonderful booklet, very informative, wonderful booklet, but about this idea of Scottish embellishment.
Yes, it's keening. It's called keening. The west coast of Scotland, it's a particular way of congregational singing of the psalms. It sounds like the Scotch snap, which
I read it, but I have no idea what you're talking about. The Scotch snap.
So that's a reverse. So there are two things. The Scotch snap is the reverse dotted rhythm. So instead of ba 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 ba, you have yada 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 like that. So that's the Scotch snap. But the keening is the embellishment where you have a cluster of ornaments or just one ornament before the note itself. And that is infused into his music.
Okay, well, I think you've answered the question. I think you have Miserere, for example, the 2009 piece that has, by the way, a beautifully rounded and gentle sound. It's just delicious, but there are these keenings.
Yes.
And I wondered about the reason I asked about the ornamentation is I was hearing trills, and it was almost like, what's that where it's very distant, but it reminded me somehow, is that part of this business, these trillings, and it reminded me almost of how of an Arabic, the women do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is of course completely different, but just the idea of how universal music is, how we cultures pick up things from all over.
And how the human voice is used to express emotion.
Yeah, wonderful, and so it's a beautiful chant-like moment. I'm looking at the Miserere right now.
Yes, he deliberately evokes the Allegri setting. That's deliberate moments in the middle of the piece that he conjures up the Allegri.
And then shalt thou accept the sacrifice of justice. I loved that section. To the end, deeply moving. So satisfying. What an incredible experience.
When I first heard that, it blew me away.
Matching text to sound, from a composer's point of view, that's really the secret. And I think his music matches the text always. So as you said, with total integrity.
Yes.
Let's look at Frank Martin for a moment. This Mass for double choir. Now it's very hard to kind of distinguish what might the real experience be when you're listening to a recording. But I could hear, if you will, sections moving through these double choirs. The Kyrie, I mean, just a wonderful, again, this use of chant, and then the whole thing builds and builds. Tell me a little bit, again, this huge sound where I thought, how on earth? Can you give me just a little overview of your impressions as a conductor of Frank Martin and putting this double mass together? You mentioned that it was one of your bucket lists in life.
The piece is, although it's extraordinarily passionate and but has this background of polyphony as well, but it's also deeply unsettling. The meter changes regularly. It never really settles at a tonal center. It's always moving. The tonal center is always moving. He uses the double choir in different ways. So, and the juxtaposition of double choir vertical moments with double choir horizontal moments, that always changes as well. So normally if you're if you're singing a double choir piece, it would be laid out antiphonally or homophonically, vertically. And he mixes the two all the time. So you don't know whether you're going to be in response to the other choir or singing with the other choir at the same time. As I said, the meter is mixed. The harmonic language, it's wonderful. It's incredible. It's passionate. It's rich. But it's always moving.
It's also very accessible, by the way.
Changing.
And
So
it's
it's
also
a
very accessible. This is music that's extremely accessible. It's contemporary music, but very accessible. Yeah.
but the oral um, the oral perception is of is that it's very accessible, and that's the genius of it all. That to perform it, it's deeply unsettling. Very rewarding because you have amazing vocal lines to sing, but it's deeply unsettling, and I think that's why the piece is so immediate and so profound.
Now, part of me is saying this is the Calvinist creating a Catholic Mass. And you've mentioned deeply unsettling a couple of times, and I'm scanning my notes and trying to see what exactly you mean by deeply unsettling. Would you mind explaining that, please? Is
So,
that for the performers or for the or the text and its
but
presentation?
the performers, um,
Ah,
not not just to say it's hard, because that's simplistic, but in the way it makes you really think about how what you are singing and never letting you rest,
I
never letting you
suspected.
rest either with the meter, so the time signature is always changing,
Yeah.
but never letting you rest harmonically either.
Okay, so now I understand what you mean by disturbing is from the point of view of the performers.
Yeah.
It's so difficult and never takes a rest that it's disturbing. It's hard. You have to be on your toes all the time. Am I close now?
Yes, and therefore, as a listener, what comes across is um, a very it arrests your attention. It demands
Yeah.
listening.
Yes, and that's something for an entire mass.
Yeah,
You know.
all the time. Um, Even the Agnus Dei, which begins um, as a chant, the second choir is singing in a chant-like fashion, almost like a mantra.
Yeah, that's
But this
interesting.
hauntingly beautiful unison melody in the first choir.
Yeah,
Um,
and it becomes more and more ecstatic.
yes,
The Agnus Dei. Yeah,
and
and
finishes with a great sigh.
grant us peace.
Yeah,
Most beautiful, beautiful expression of those words. Let's go back to Sir James Macmillan, Hymn to the Blessed Sacrament. And this is the only piece I think on the CD, as I recall, that has a lovely little introduction, little oboe viola introduction. It's very, very charming. And then, how did then the next of these three pieces bring us, oh Lord God, music. Again, I use the word accessible, but none of it is easy to execute. Give me just an overview of these three pieces. Are there four? I think I guess there are a total of four that end the CD. The Hymn to the Blessed Sacrament, Bring Us, O Lord God. And the Latin, which I'm terrible at pronouncing, I'll have to see if I've got a translation. All power is given to me in heaven and in earth. And by the way, that jumps. That piece just explodes with sound. Baptizing them in the name of, and I love the beautiful use of repetitive ideas and idioms, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, and then the beautiful, gripping final Alleluia. Just give me an idea of those three, and then we'll look at O Radiant Dawn as the last piece we'll talk about today.
the Hymn to the Blessed Sacrament we chose because it was an early piece, but also a first recording. Uh, and it exists as a version with organ, and as you mentioned, also in a version with viola and oboe. Um, and and what's fascinating is to go back. It was written in 1981, I think. So he was just a student. He studied with Kenneth Layton
Yes.
in Edinburgh, and you can hear the influences of Layton, but also the English 20th century compositional school. So that's
Fantastic.
fascinating to see that, and you can also see how Macmillan's own writing develops from there. The way he uses the homophonic textures uh, in the choir parts, but just infuses the harmonic language in a really distinctive and interesting way. So you can see the journey he is about to embark upon.
So this is a student work, basically. Hymn to the Blessed Sacrament is a so-called student work, far from it. But well, that's very interesting. I'll have to listen to it again then. How about Bring Us, O Lord God?
Um, in the church and cathedral scene in the UK, we love the setting of William Harris of Bring Us, O Lord God, a gorgeous double choir motet, and to perform this, it's it's a very atmospheric piece. It's very still, um, but and requires really fine singing, just from the point of stamina
Yes,
and setting up
stillness
a
is not easy.
harmonic moments. Um, but yeah, it's extraordinarily atmospheric.
Yeah, very moving. Now, how about all power is given to me in heaven and in earth?
Well, this is an example of the genius of his writing, because although it hits you and sounds extraordinarily impressive and indeed virtuosic, the piece itself isn't that hard to put together, and that's the genius of his writing. That
Very interesting.
uses motivic devices very cleverly. It's just two ideas in there really, because you have a contrasting middle section, um, but just two ideas, economy, but also a powerful and arresting piece.
Yes, and I think I mentioned, and I'm not sure whether to go through with the traffic, but the idea that so-called simple is probably the most difficult. In other words, this stillness is not
Yeah.
easy to achieve at all in
So
singing.
data is an easier piece to perform than Bring Us O Lord God, but it might appear the other way around.
And then you chose as the last piece on this beautiful CD, "O Radiant Dawn," again, Macmillan. Give me a little overview. I love that. Here's what I said. I love, again, the clean articulation. Uh, Balance between sections is virtually perfect. It's really delicious. The balance is so important. And balance and blend, so perfect with this choir. I hear all the voices very clearly. I'm thinking particularly of a little bass moment that is, subtle and right down there at the bottom, but you hear this bass, important bass tonality very clearly. Um, Come, come, shine on those who dwell in darkness. Just give me an overview of how impressive this piece is. Oh, radiant.
Well, for all the um, for all the rich harmonic language in the disc as a whole, for all the virtuosity, for all the challenges in the right way on the listener, you are arrested and made to listen to this music. That's not to do with our performance. That's just simply how this music um, how this music is. We wanted to finish the disc with something that was just a little simpler and just made its case beautifully,
Exactly right.
simply, but still powerfully. It's one of the Advent antiphons, and James Macmillan wrote a series of motets called the Strathclyde motets, which were designed to be performed by amateur church choirs, and this is one of those. Um, and he's very clever. Again, the material is very simple, but um, the the atmosphere and the message is very clear and powerful. It's a it's a loud opening that demands your attention. O radiant dawn, O radiant dawn. Um, but when he says for the Advent period, when he says come, 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 and he repeats that with all these incredible suspensions, and then
Gorgeous.
releases it on shine. It's quite a moment. It has been that piece is very popular with choirs in the UK.
Yeah, and very brilliantly put together. Really. Wonderful composer. I think we'd better stop. We're at 45 minutes. I'm way over. People are nodding off or moving on to other business, washing the dishes and so on. I'm having
And I must go and pick up my wife from the station.
oh, no, well, we mustn't let her wait. I've had a wonderful chat. Thanks so much. Neil Ferris, conductor of the British choral ensemble Sonoro. All of this, my video interview with you and links to buy the CD. This is a Resonance CD released from Great Britain, 2018. Passion and Polyphony, Sacred Choral Music by Frank Martin and James Macmillan. Superb CD. I hope choral people out there, especially in North America, are going to have an opportunity to have a look and listen at this glorious CD and perhaps perform more of these two men's incredible repertoire. Many, many thanks for giving me some
Thank,
time.
thank you so much, Dan. It's been really wonderful to talk to you.
Great.